His name was Chester Nimitz. He was a former submarine officer, and for 21 months he signed the same form over and over again. Overdue and presumed lost. 71 men on USS Grampus, 105 men on USS Argonaut, 3,500 American submariners in total before the war was over. And every one of those boats went to sea with a torpedo that Washington swore was working. By late July 1943, after reading yet another patrol report documenting multiple torpedo hits with almost no explosions, Chester Nimitz had seen enough. He stopped waiting for Washington to act. He authorized his submarine force to take live torpedoes with warheads armed sail out to a small volcanic island off the coast of Maui and fire them directly into the cliffs. Not at a Japanese ship, at solid rock. So divers could go down to the ocean floor, recover the ones that failed to explode, bring them back to a workbench at Pearl Harbor and cut them open. He needed to see with his own eyes what the Bureau of Ordnance had refused to acknowledge for nearly 2 years. If your father served on a submarine in the Pacific, or your grandfather, or your uncle, this is the story he probably never told you. To understand why Chester Nimitz did what he did in the summer of 1943, to understand what it cost him to wait this long before doing it, you have to go back 35 years. To a young ensign, 23 years old, standing on the bridge of a destroyer that has just run aground because he forgot to check the tide. July 7, 1908, Batangas Harbor, the Philippines. The afternoon heat is the same heat that will sit over Pearl Harbor decades later. The destroyer USS Decatur approaches the anchorage. On her bridge is a young officer from Fredericksburg, Texas. He is 23 years old. He has been in command for 2 months. He has not checked the tide tables. He does not know that the water beneath the Decatur is shallower than the chart suggests and getting shallower by the minute. The ship strikes bottom. She grinds to a halt on a mud bank in the middle of the harbor. Nobody is killed. The damage to the hull is superficial. A small steamer arrives the next morning and pulls her free. In the world of naval accidents, it is not a catastrophe. But the Navy does not forgive a captain who did not read the tide. A court-martial is convened. Chester Nimitz is found guilty of neglect of duty. He receives a letter of reprimand. At 23 years old, before his career has properly begun, he is carrying a mark that most young officers never carry and never recover from. Washington assigns him to submarines. In 1908, this is not a promotion. It is a place the Navy puts officers when it isn't sure what else to do with them. The boats of that era are called pig boats. They are cramped. They smell of gasoline. Their engines fill the sealed metal hull with fumes that can kill a crew in their sleep. They dive to depths where the hull creaks and settles and reminds every man inside it that the ocean above him weighs more than any structure ever built. The officers who volunteer for submarine duty are not the officers the Navy is grooming for Admiral. Nimitz does not complain. He does not request reassignment. He reports for duty and begins to learn. In May of 1909, he takes command of USS Plunger. He studies the machinery until he understands it better than the men who built it. He learns the click of a depth gauge, the whine of a trim pump, the smell of hot metal and diesel, and the sweat of 20 men in a sealed steel tube. He converts his boats from gasoline engines to diesel. Cleaner, more reliable, less likely to kill his crew with fumes or fire. He writes papers on submarine tactics that the Naval War College files away and does not read. In 1912, he stands before a room of senior officers at the Naval War College and gives a lecture. Submarines, he tells them, will one day close the throat of any empire that depends on shipping. Any nation whose oil and ore and food and steel must cross open ocean to reach its factories and its cities has a vulnerability that a boat beneath the waterline can exploit. The officers in the room listen politely. They consider submarines a curiosity. They return to their studies of the battle line, the gun duel, the fleet engagement. This is where wars are decided, not below the waves, not by 23 men in a metal tube breathing recycled air. Nimitz has spent 3 years inside those tubes. He is not confused about what they can do. He is 30 years ahead of his own service. He does not know it yet. Neither does anyone else. December 31st, 1941. Pearl Harbor. 8 in the morning. 24 days have passed since Japanese aircraft came in low over the harbor and turned the Pacific Fleet into wreckage. The Arizona is 27 feet below the surface. The Oklahoma has capsized. The West Virginia, the California, the Nevada all sunk or beached in a single Sunday morning. The ceremony to install the new Commander-in-Chief of the United States Pacific Fleet cannot take place on the deck of a battleship. There is no undamaged battleship available. It takes place on the deck of a submarine. USS Grayling, SS-209. She is tied up at the submarine base, and her deck is where Chester Nimitz, now 56 years old, formally takes command of what is left of the American Pacific. He steps off the launch onto the dock. The harbor is black with oil. Not metaphorically. The fuel from the ships that burned in the first hours of December 7th has spread across the surface and sits there thick and dark between the sunken hulls. The smell of it is in his uniform before he reaches the ceremony. The officers waiting for him are not smiling. They know what the fleet looks like now. They know what is left. 3 carriers at sea, a handful of cruisers, a submarine force that has not yet fired a single torpedo in anger against the Navy that did this. Nimitz looks at the wreckage. He looks at the Arizona where she went down. He looks at the Oklahoma, her hull still showing above the waterline, men still inside her whose bodies will never be recovered. He is quiet for a moment. Then he turns to his staff. "Get to work," he says. He does not go to the battleships first. He does not walk the airfields. He does not tour the command bunkers or the fuel depots or the dry docks still working around the clock to pull ships off the bottom of the harbor. He goes to the submarine base. He walks through the boats the way a man walks through a house he grew up in, with a knowledge that lives in the hands and the feet, not just the head. He knows every sound these hulls make. He knows what the gauges mean when they read wrong. He knows the smell of a boat that is ready and the smell of one that is not. The officer accompanying him has spent his career on surface ships. He watches the new commander-in-chief move through the submarine and understands without being told that this man has been here before. On December 7th, 1941, the same day the bombs fell, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Harold Stark had issued the order for unrestricted submarine warfare against Japan. Every Japanese vessel on the Pacific Ocean was now a legitimate target. No warning required. Nimitz inherits that order. He makes it the spine of everything he does. The submarines go to sea. The first patrol reports come back within weeks. They all say the same thing. The torpedoes are not working. There is a phrase the United States Navy uses when a submarine does not come home. 4 words: overdue and presumed lost. It appears on a standard form, bureaucratic, clean, designed to describe a specific administrative condition. A boat departs on patrol. It does not return. Radio contact is attempted. No response. More attempts. Still nothing. Enough days pass that silence becomes its own answer. The boat is gone. The men are gone. Nobody knows exactly where. Nobody knows exactly when. Nobody knows what the last hour looked like. Chester Nimitz signs those forms. He does not have an aide initial them on his behalf. He does not delegate the paperwork to a subordinate and move on to something more important. He signs them himself, every one of them, because he knows in a way that most men of his rank cannot know exactly what those 4 words describe from the inside. He has been below periscope depth. He has heard the sounds a pressure hull makes when it goes deep, the creak of metal under compression, the way the frame settles, the small adjustments of a boat finding its trim in cold water. He has stood in a control room when the boat went quiet and every man stopped what he was doing and watched the gauges and waited to find out whether the next sound would be water coming in or the signal to surface. He knows that silence. He has lived in it. And 30 years later, sitting at a desk at Pearl Harbor, reading a form that says, "A boat and its crew will not be coming back." He knows precisely what that silence looks like at its end. February 11th, 1943, USS Grampus, SS-207. She departs Brisbane on her 6th war patrol. She is not a green boat. She has sunk Japanese shipping. She has survived depth charge attacks. Her crew of 71 men knows the work. Somewhere in the waters near the Solomon Islands, she disappears. No distress call, no survivors, no wreckage ever found. On March 22, 1943, after weeks of unanswered radio traffic, the Navy lists USS Grampus as overdue and presumed lost with all hands. All hands. 71 men. Nimitz signs the form. He does not know if she was sunk by a Japanese destroyer. He does not know if it was depth charges or a mine or something mechanical that failed at a depth where nobody could reach her. What he knows is the number, 71. And he knows that on every one of the patrols USS Grampus ran, every dive, every approach, every shot taken through a periscope, her crew carried the Mark 14 torpedo. If your grandfather was on Grampus, or knew someone who was, he may never have told you what happened to those 71 men. Nobody knows. To this day, the wreck has never been found. Grampus is not the exception. USS Argonaut, SS-166, lost in January 1943 in the Bismarck Sea, taking 105 men with her. In 1942 alone, the Pacific Submarine Force loses 7 boats. 7 times Nimitz signs the form. Some are sunk by Japanese destroyers, some by depth charges in waters they were ordered into. Some vanish without a witness. And on every patrol, every one of those crews, they carried the same weapon. In 1942, American submarines fire 1,442 torpedoes across the Pacific. Post-war analysis of Japanese records. The actual accounting done after the war ended from Japanese documents of what Japanese ships actually went down finds 109 ships sunk. 109. From 1,442 torpedoes. That's about 120 torpedoes a month, fired at a Japanese merchant fleet hauling oil and steel and rice back to the home islands. 7% hit rate. 93% of every torpedo the Pacific Submarine Force fired that year did nothing at all. In a war being run at Nimitz's direction as a campaign to cut the supply lines that keep Japan alive. Nimitz reads those numbers. He also reads the Bureau of Ordnance's response to every complaint filed through proper channels by submarine commanders who came back from patrol and put the evidence in writing. The Bureau's answer does not change. Not after the first complaint, not after the 10th, not after the 100th. The fault lies with the crews, not the torpedo, the men. He is a former submariner reading a report that tells him the men inside those boats are the problem. He knows what those men are. He trained alongside them. He worked the same machinery. He ran the same approaches. He lived in the same sealed world below the surface. He knows what that answer is worth. He does not say publicly what he thinks of it. There is a particular kind of weight in knowing you are right and not yet having the proof that forces the system to stop. Chester Nimitz carries that weight to his desk every morning. Some mornings there is a new form waiting. He signs it. He goes to work. And somewhere at that same hour in a shipyard on the western coast of Australia, a torpedo the Bureau of Ordnance has certified as combat-ready is being loaded into the tubes of an American submarine getting ready to leave for a war patrol. That boat has a crew of 70 men on board. Some of them will not come home. Spring 1942, Fremantle, Australia. The air is different here than at Pearl Harbor. Drier, cooler. The war feels closer because the war is closer. Fremantle sits on the western edge of Australia, and from its docks, the American submarines of the Southwest Pacific slip out into the Indian Ocean and around into the shipping lanes off Java and Borneo. This is where they hunt. The man in command of them is Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood. He is 51 years old. He has been in submarines since 1914, since the Navy's second submarine. He knows what a boat sounds like at 300 feet. He knows what a torpedo is supposed to do when it leaves the tube. His commanders are telling him something is wrong. They come back from patrol, they file reports, they describe attacks that should have sunk ships and did not. They describe torpedoes that ran true past under the target and continued on into empty water. They describe the sound of a torpedo striking a hull and then nothing. No explosion, no fireball, no settling ship. Just the fading noise of their own weapon disappearing into the dark. Lockwood is a submariner. He believes his men. He asks the Bureau of Ordnance to investigate. The Bureau responds, the torpedo runs exactly where it is set. The exploder works exactly as designed. The problem is not the weapon. The problem is the crews. Lockwood reads the response. He puts it down. Then he does something that could end his career. He orders his own test, without authorization from Washington, without the approval of the Bureau of Ordnance, without the paperwork that a peacetime Navy would have required. June 20th, 1942. King George Sound, southern Australia. A fishing net has been strung below the surface at a measured depth. USS Sauri moves into position. Her crew loads Mark 14 torpedoes with dummy warheads. Each one is set to run at 10 feet. The first torpedo leaves the tube. The men on the surface watch the water. They wait. They pull up the net. The holes are not at 10 feet. They are at 21 feet. Not 1 foot deep, not 2, 11 feet. That's the height of a small house. That's how far below the Japanese ships every American torpedo had been passing. For 6 months of war, Lockwood does the math in his head. Every submarine commander who has come back from patrol and reported an attack that should have worked. Every torpedo that ran true and missed. Every ship that turned away unharmed, while men in a metal tube below the waterline tried to understand what had just gone wrong. For 6 months, the answer has been sitting 11 feet below where it was supposed to be. Lockwood repeats the test on July 8th with USS Skipjack to be certain. Same result. He writes his report. He sends it to the Bureau of Ordnance. The Bureau disagrees with his findings. He is a rear admiral. He commands the submarine force of the Southwest Pacific. He has fired live weapons at a fishing net and pulled up physical evidence of a defect that has been killing his men for 6 months. And the Bureau that designed the weapon tells him he is wrong. Lockwood takes his findings over their heads. He sends them to Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, the man above every admiral in the United States Navy. King reads them. King is not a diplomatic man. King does not write polite letters when he does not need to. He lights a blowtorch under the Bureau of Ordnance. August 1st, 1942. The Bureau officially concedes. The Mark 14 runs deep. The cause, when it is finally traced, is almost embarrassing in its simplicity. Years before the war, during a redesign, engineers had moved the torpedo's pressure sensor from the nose to the tail. At the tail, moving through the water at 46 knots, the sensor sat inside a pocket of reduced pressure created by the torpedo's own motion. That pocket told the sensor the torpedo was running shallower than it actually was. So the guidance mechanism drove the weapon deeper, to correct for a problem that did not exist. A torpedo set to run at 15 feet was passing beneath its target at 26 feet. By this point in the war, more than 800 Mark 14 torpedoes have already been fired at Japanese shipping. The fix is ordered, a corrected pressure mechanism. It takes months to reach the fleet. Nimitz watches the numbers. They improve. They do not improve enough. There is a second system inside the Mark 14, a second way for the weapon to detonate. It is called the Mark 6 exploder, and it is in theory the most devastating torpedo detonator any Navy has ever put to sea. It works by magnetism. As the torpedo passes beneath the hull of a steel ship, it senses the change in the Earth's magnetic field caused by the mass of metal above it. At the correct moment, it fires. The warhead does not detonate against the side of the ship. It detonates beneath the keel. A hull explosion tears a hole in the side. A ship can flood and settle and sometimes still be saved. A keel explosion breaks the spine. The vessel snaps in half. It goes down in minutes. In theory, on paper, in the calm waters off Newport, Rhode Island, where the weapon was designed. The Mark 6 is the future of naval warfare. In practice, in the Pacific, at tropical latitudes thousands of miles from the magnetic poles, where the Earth's field is weaker and flatter than the conditions the mechanism was calibrated for. It fires early, a premature explosion in open water loud enough to warn every destroyer within 5 miles doing nothing, or it does not fire at all. The submarine commanders figure it out before the Bureau does. The first one to act is Captain Tyrell Jacobs, USS Sargo, first war patrol of the entire Pacific War, December 1941. He fires 13 torpedoes on that patrol. Every one of them fails. He returns to base and on his own authority, without asking Washington, disables the magnetic feature of the Mark 6 exploder on his remaining weapons. He gets, in the language of Navy records, into considerable difficulty for doing so. The man who identified the problem first, who fixed it on his own initiative, who did what the Bureau refused to do, is punished for being right. By 1943, what began as one captain's private decision has spread through the submarine force. Commanders share notes. They pass instructions between boats. They quietly disable the magnetic exploders on their own weapons and say nothing about it in their official reports. They are in effect running an underground network inside their own Navy. Nimitz finds out. He does not discipline them. He reads their patrol reports. He understands their reasoning. He knows what those men are trying to do in the dark with a weapon their own service has told them is working perfectly. June 24, 1943. As Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, Nimitz issues a direct order: deactivate all magnetic exploders on all Pacific Fleet submarines. The Bureau of Ordnance responds. They ask him why. His reply is one sentence: his decision is final. The Bureau notes its disagreement in the official record. The order stands: 2 defects, 2 fixes, 18 months of war, and every week submarines depart Pearl Harbor carrying weapons that may or may not fire, and every few weeks one of them does not come back. Chester Nimitz is not a man who slams his fist on a table. He is not the kind of admiral who fires off angry cables to Washington or calls press conferences to publicly humiliate a bureau that has failed his men. He has been doing this the right way, through proper channels, with documented evidence, building a record that no one in Washington can dismiss. And the right way has given him 2 partial fixes in a war that is still being fought with a weapon he cannot fully trust. Then comes July 24, 1943, the Philippine Sea. Afternoon. Lieutenant Commander Lawrence Randall Daspit is at the periscope of USS Tinosa. He is 38 years old. This is his 2nd war patrol as commanding officer. He is a careful man, a patient man, the kind of officer who runs textbook approaches. In the crosshairs of his periscope is something that does not happen twice in a career. Tonon Maru No. 3, Japanese fleet tanker, 19,262 tons, one of the largest tankers in the Imperial Japanese Navy, loaded with fuel, moving from Palau to Truk, making 13 knots. No escort, not zigzagging, alone in open water. The codebreakers had put Tinosa in her path before dawn. Daspit runs the calculations. He sets up the approach. He fires his first spread. 4 torpedoes. The sonar man hears them running true. Clean tracks. 4 hits. Silence. The tanker turns away, increases speed. Daspit surfaces and gives chase. All through the night, the diesel engines of Tinosa push her forward across the Philippine Sea in pursuit of a 19,000-ton ship that should already be at the bottom. By the next morning, he is back in position, this time coming at the tanker from the starboard quarter. An awkward angle, not textbook, not the shot every submarine commander trains for. He fires 2 torpedoes. Both hit. Both explode. They strike the engine room. The tanker coasts to a stop and settles by the stern. She is dead in the water. She is not sinking. Daspit now has what every submarine commander in the United States Navy has trained his entire career to have: a stationary target, point-blank range, perfect firing position. The tanker cannot move, cannot maneuver, cannot defend herself. She sits on the surface of the Philippine Sea like a target in a peacetime exercise. 90 degrees off to the beam, he fires 1 torpedo. The sonar man calls the track. Running normal. Impact. Silence. Daspit repositions Tinosa, moves to the other side of the tanker. Between each shot, his torpedo men pull the next weapon from the rack and inspect it end to end. Every fish declared in perfect working order before it enters the tube. He fires again. Silence. He fires again. The torpedo runs straight. It strikes the hull. It glances off. It jumps clear of the water 100 feet from the tanker's stern. In his patrol report, Daspit later wrote with visible frustration that he found it difficult to believe what he had just witnessed. He fires again. Silence. He fires again. Silence. Each entry in the log now reads the same. Fired. Hit. No apparent effect. Fired. Hit. No apparent effect. Somewhere in America tonight, an old man may be watching this and remembering. He was on a boat like Tinosa. He fired torpedoes that did not explode. He came home. Many of his friends did not. A Japanese destroyer appears on the horizon coming toward them at speed. Daspit fires 2 more torpedoes from the stern tubes as Tinosa dives. Both hit, neither explodes. He has fired 15 torpedoes. 13 have hit their target. 2 have exploded, both fired at awkward angles during the night before he had the perfect position. Every torpedo fired from the ideal 90-degree angle. Every shot that a submarine commander spends years learning to execute. Every one of them silence. One torpedo remains in the racks. Daspit does not fire it. He orders the last weapon secured. He orders Tinosa to turn around. He sets a course for Pearl Harbor, 2,400 miles away. He is not returning to rearm. He is returning with something no submarine commander has ever brought back before. A torpedo that hit its target and did not explode, and a patrol report documenting 13 hits and 11 detonation failures. Charles Lockwood is at Pearl Harbor when Tinosa arrives. By this point, Lockwood is commander of Submarines Pacific. He has been at this fight longer than anyone. He goes down to the dock. He expects to see a man in a rage. 19,000-ton tankers, he later writes, do not grow on trees. Daspit is almost silent. He hands Lockwood the patrol report. He says almost nothing. The last torpedo, the one carried home across 2,400 miles of ocean, is taken to the torpedo shop at the submarine base and completely disassembled by the base technicians. Their finding: it is in perfect working order. A torpedo the shop certifies as combat ready. A patrol report documenting 13 hits and 11 detonation failures. The gap between those two facts is a question the Bureau of Ordnance has never answered, because they have never asked it. The Mark 14 entered production in 1930. The Great Depression had gutted the Navy's development budget. There was no money for what the war would later require. The engineers who designed the weapon could not afford to fire live weapons at actual targets. Every test before the war used reduced speed runs, practice warheads, controlled conditions designed to protect expensive equipment. Not one live fire test, not one, not in 13 years of production. Each torpedo cost $10,000 in 1930s money. And the United States Navy, run out of a bureau in Washington by men who had not been to sea in a decade, made a decision. They would not destroy a torpedo to test it. They would send it to war instead, and find out under fire at the cost of the men who carried it whether the weapon they had built actually worked. For 13 years, nobody had looked. The Bureau of Ordnance was not hiding a defect. They did not know what was inside the weapon they had certified. They had never seen a Mark 14 strike a steel target at 46 knots. Not one man in Washington had ever seen it. Chester Nimitz sits at his desk at Pearl Harbor. In front of him is the patrol report from USS Tinosa. 13 hits, 11 failures. He reads it again. He puts it down. He gives Lockwood the authorization. Late August 1943, USS Muskellunge, SS-262, has been at Pearl Harbor for just 3 weeks. She is fresh from her shakedown cruise. Her captain, Lieutenant Commander Willard Saunders, has been given a special assignment before his first war patrol. The southern coast of Kahoolawe Island. Kahoolawe sits 8 miles off the coast of Maui. It is small. It is volcanic. It is uninhabited. And along part of its shoreline, the cliffs run straight down into deep water with a sandy bottom that a diver can reach. Muskellunge moves into position off the cliff face. Her crew has been briefed. This is not a war patrol. There is no Japanese ship on the horizon. There is a wall of black volcanic rock rising out of the Pacific, and there are torpedoes in the tubes with live warheads, and the order is to fire them into the cliff. The first torpedo leaves the tube. It runs true. It strikes the rock. It explodes. A column of white water rises against the black wall of the cliff. The sound reaches the boat a moment later. The second torpedo leaves the tube. It runs true. It strikes the rock. It explodes. The third torpedo leaves the tube. It runs true. It strikes the rock. Silence. The men on the bridge of Muskellunge stand very still. There is the sound of the ocean against the hull, the sound of the wind, and somewhere beneath the surface on the sandy bottom at the base of the cliff, a torpedo that hit its target and did not explode is sitting in the dark waiting to be recovered. Divers go down. They find the weapon broken in two. The warhead is split. They bring it up carefully. They lift it onto a barge. They take it back to Pearl Harbor. At the submarine base on a workbench in the torpedo shop, technicians open it up. Simultaneously at the shop itself, a second test is running. A crane has been raised 90 feet above a steel plate. The height was chosen for a specific reason. When a dummy warhead falls 90 feet, the velocity at impact matches the running speed of a Mark 14 torpedo at high-speed setting. 46 knots. The dummy warheads filled with sand are dropped onto the plate. When the plate is set at an angle, the exploders fire. When the plate is set perpendicular to the drop, a perfect 90 degrees, the textbook shot. The impact every American submarine commander has spent his career learning to execute. 70% of the exploders fail to fire. 70%. The result from the cliff at Kahoolawe confirms what the crane at Pearl Harbor is showing. The answer is in the firing pin. When a torpedo strikes a hull head-on at 46 knots, the deceleration force is greater than the firing pin mechanism was designed to absorb. The guide rods that direct the pin distort under the impact. The pin cannot travel fast enough to strike the primer with sufficient force. The detonator does not fire. The harder and more perfect the hit, the more likely the firing pin mechanism would distort and fail to strike the primer with enough force. This explained why the worst results came from the best shots. The textbook 90-degree approaches that submarine commanders had trained their entire careers to execute. The 2 torpedoes Daspit fired during the nighttime chase, the 2 that exploded, were fired at oblique angles under pressure from an awkward position not textbook. Every subsequent torpedo fired from the ideal 90-degree angle, after the tanker was dead in the water, after Daspit had all the time he needed to line up the perfect shot, did not. The better the shot, the more likely the dud. For 21 months, every submarine commander who came back from patrol and reported that his torpedoes had hit their targets and failed to detonate had been filing without knowing it, proof of exactly this. The men who had been blamed for the failure were the ones who had been executing the shot correctly. The fix does not come from Washington. No team of engineers arrives from the Bureau of Ordnance. No project is launched with Navy Department resources. No official program is funded or announced. The torpedo shop at the Pearl Harbor Naval Submarine Base redesigns the firing pin. The steel firing pin blocks are replaced with aluminum alloy. Lighter, faster, strong enough under the impact load to reach the primer before the mechanism can distort. The redesign is done by machinists and ordnance men in a shop on the submarine base. They work from what the cliff and the crane have shown them. They cut, they test, they install. Charles Lockwood inspects every rebuilt exploder before it is installed in a weapon. He will not send another submarine to sea with a torpedo he has not personally verified. September 1943. 21 months after USS Sargo fired 13 torpedoes on her first war patrol and watched every one of them fail. American submarines leave Pearl Harbor with torpedoes that work. What happens in the next 18 months is what Nimitz had bet everything on from the first week. Finally, actually happening. American submarines sink more than 1,000 Japanese merchant ships in the final 18 months of the war. The numbers, when you read them now, sound like statistics. They were not statistics to Japan. Japanese oil imports to the home islands collapse, from 1.75 million barrels per month to almost nothing by late 1944. Japanese pilots complete their flight training. They arrive at airfields across the Western Pacific. They cannot fly. There is no aviation fuel. Japanese warships are finished in the yards at Kure. They sit at anchor. There is no oil to put in their engines. The factories at home producing artillery shells and aircraft parts slow, and slow again. The raw materials that fed them are no longer arriving. The freighters carrying them are no longer crossing the ocean. The ocean is no longer safe for the ships that Japan's empire had always assumed would be there. By 1945, Japan's foreign trade has declined by more than 60%. The decisive naval battle that Japan spent 20 years planning. The single afternoon that would shatter American will and force a negotiated peace never comes. Nimitz never gave them the conditions for it. The weapon he had counted on from the first week of the war was finally doing what he had known it could do. 2 years late, September 2nd, 1945, Tokyo Bay. USS Missouri sits at anchor. The sky over the bay is gray. There are cameras on the deck. There are correspondents. There is a table with documents laid out. General Douglas MacArthur stands at the microphone on the forward deck. He speaks for 4 minutes. He describes what this moment means to civilization, to freedom, to the generations that will follow. His voice carries across the deck. The Japanese delegation steps forward and signs. Then it is Chester Nimitz's turn. He is 60 years old. He walks to the table. He signs with one pen. He steps back. A yeoman hands him the pen afterward. He puts it in his pocket. One of the correspondents present will write that evening that Nimitz signed and withdrew so quickly it was easy to miss he had been there at all. He flies back to Pearl Harbor. He has one task remaining, his final report on the Pacific War. Several hundred pages. Every major campaign from December 1941 to August 1945. He names the decisions that were correct. He names the operations that succeeded and explains why. He notes the failures. He does not name the individuals responsible for them. He submits it to the Navy Department. It receives no press coverage. There is a number that does not appear in that report. Not because Nimitz does not know it, because some numbers resist being written down cleanly in a document that will be filed and archived and read by strangers who were not there. 52 American submarines were lost in the Pacific War. 374 officers, 3,131 enlisted men, 3,505 men. 22% of every man who served on war patrols did not come home. The highest loss rate of any branch of the United States Armed Forces. Some were sunk by Japanese destroyers, some by depth charges in waters they had been ordered into. Some struck mines they could not see. Some disappeared in circumstances that left no witness and no answer. And some of them, we will never know exactly how many, went to sea carrying a Mark 14 torpedo that the Bureau of Ordnance had certified as reliable, fired it at a target, and heard silence. Nimitz knew the difference between those deaths. He had signed the forms, overdue and presumed lost. He had signed them for 21 months, while the Bureau answered every complaint from his submarine commanders the same way. The fault lies with the crews. He never said publicly what he thought of that answer. He authorized the torpedoes to be fired into the cliff, found in days what Washington had not found in 13 years of producing the weapon, fixed it with a torpedo shop at Pearl Harbor, and went back to work. Chester Nimitz died on February 20th, 1966. He was 80 years old. He died at his quarters on Yerba Buena Island in San Francisco Bay, the same Navy that had been his home for 60 years, providing the rooms where he spent his last years. He was buried at Golden Gate National Cemetery in San Bruno, California. The men buried beside him were not selected by protocol, not by rank, not by proximity to his fame. Raymond Spruance, Richmond Kelly Turner, Charles Lockwood, the man who had fought the Bureau of Ordnance from a desk at Pearl Harbor, who had fired torpedoes into a cliff because Washington would not, who had rebuilt the weapon from the torpedo shop up, buried beside the man who sent those submarines to sea and signed the forms for the ones that did not come back. They had arranged it while they were still alive. No announcement, no ceremony organized for cameras, just the men who had done the work together in the ground, the way they had always preferred to operate. Out of the spotlight, getting on with it. If your father served on a submarine in the Pacific, or your grandfather, or your uncle, I want to ask you something. Did he tell you about it? The men of that generation, as a rule, did not. Not at dinner, not in the living room on Sunday afternoon, not in the ordinary language of a life that had moved forward from what they had been through. But some of them talked, late at night, to a wife, in a car on a long drive, to a son who did not ask the right question until it was almost too late. In the last years of a life when the things they had never said started finding their way out. Maybe he told you the name of his boat. Maybe he mentioned a patrol once, just once, and then went quiet and did not explain. Maybe you found something after he was gone. A photograph, a service record, a patch from a boat whose history you never knew. If you have one of those stories, even a fragment, even something you only half remember, write it in the comments. The name of the boat, the year he served, whatever you know. Because those men went to sea with weapons that did not work, and they went back out anyway. The stories they carried home, the ones that never made a newspaper, never appeared in any history book, told once at a kitchen table to people who loved them and did not fully understand what they were hearing. Those stories, the ones that were never written in official reports, are part of how this war was actually won. Don't let them disappear.